My name is Lila, and I just graduated from high school. I live, or should I say lived, with my parents, Sarah and David Mitchell, in a modest two-story house in Pennsylvania. There's also my older brother Jake, though he moved out a few years ago to a nearby city. He's 25 now, 7 years older than me, and has always been the golden child of our family. Growing up, I watched how my parents bent over backwards to give Jake everything he wanted. If he showed even the slightest interest in something, they'd jump at the chance to support him. Hockey? They bought him the most expensive gear. Drawing? The finest art supplies. Skateboarding? A custom-made board. It didn't matter that he'd get bored after a few months and move on to the next thing, they were always ready to fund his next adventure. I remember this one Christmas that really stuck with me. Jake's birthday is a week before Christmas, and that year, when he turned 16, my parents bought him this super expensive gaming computer he'd been talking about nonstop. Must have cost them a fortune. Come Christmas morning, all I got was a card saying Merry Christmas. They said they'd run out of money. That's pretty much how it always went. Jake's birthdays were these huge celebrations with awesome presents, and I'd get whatever was left over at Christmas, if anything at all. My parents never really bothered with my birthdays. A small cake, maybe a new shirt or some school supplies, that was about it. No parties, no celebrations, nothing special. That's why I was completely thrown off when they sat me down in our living room last week, just days after my graduation. Lila, Mom said, smoothing her shirt like she always does when she's trying to appear casual, we've been thinking. You're turning 18 soon, and it's a big milestone. We want to throw you a proper party. I nearly choked on my coffee. A party? I asked, sure I must have heard wrong. Dad nodded, looking unusually enthusiastic. Yes, sweetheart. We'll invite the whole family, make it a real celebration. I sat there, staring at them both, trying to figure out what the catch was. My parents aren't the type to suddenly change their ways without a reason. Something was up, I could feel it in my gut. Why now? I asked, trying to keep the suspicion out of my voice. You've never wanted to throw me a party before. Well, you're graduating high school, going to college soon, Mom said, waving her hand dismissively. It's different now. You're becoming an adult. I nodded slowly, but something didn't feel right. The way they were acting, the sudden interest in celebrating my birthday, it was all too convenient. But I couldn't put my finger on what exactly was wrong. Over the next few days, I actually started getting excited about the party. Maybe I'd been too quick to judge my parents' intentions. After all, it made sense, I was turning 18, had just graduated with honors, and was heading off to college soon. Perhaps they'd finally realized that I deserved some recognition too. I kept catching Mom on the phone, talking in hushed tones about party arrangements. She was ordering a fancy cake from the local bakery, planning out decorations, and putting together a guest list. Dad seemed unusually invested too, cleaning up the backyard and fixing that wobbly patio furniture he'd been ignoring for months. Do you need any help? I offered one afternoon, finding Mom in the kitchen surrounded by party planning notes. She jumped slightly, quickly shuffling some papers together. No, sweetie. We want this to be a surprise. Just focus on enjoying your special day. I shrugged and grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl. Okay, if you're sure. By the way, is Jake coming? Of course he is, Mom replied, but something in her voice sounded off. He wouldn't miss his little sister's big day. I wanted to believe her, but Jake hadn't returned any of my texts in the past week. Typical Jake, really, always too busy with his own life to care about anyone else's. 2 days before the party, I was heading downstairs to get a glass of water when I heard my parents talking in the kitchen. I normally wouldn't eavesdrop, but something in Dad's tone made me pause at the top of the stairs. David, are you sure everything will be perfect? Mom's voice was tense. Your mother is very particular about these things. I froze. Grandma Eleanor was coming? She lived in Massachusetts and rarely visited us. The last time I'd seen her was almost 2 years ago. "Sarah, we have to make this work," Dad replied urgently. "Mom needs to see that we're making an effort with Lila. You know how she gets about how we treat the kids." I know. She's always going on about how we favor Jake. And we can't afford to upset her right now. That money she gave us last year is the only thing keeping us afloat. If she decides to stop helping us." Their voices dropped lower, but I'd heard enough. Everything suddenly made sense: the sudden interest in my birthday, the elaborate party plans, all of it. This wasn't about me at all. This was about impressing Grandma Eleanor. I slid down to sit on the top step, my throat tight with disappointment. Grandma Eleanor had always been different from my parents. She saw through Jake's charm and actually paid attention to me. Every time she visited, she'd point out how unfairly my parents treated me compared to Jake. And I knew she was wealthy. She lived in this beautiful historic house in Massachusetts and had helped my parents financially several times over the years. The pieces all fell into place. My parents weren't throwing this party to celebrate my achievements or to make up for years of neglect. They were doing it to put on a show for Grandma Eleanor, to convince her they were good parents who treated both their children equally. They were trying to secure their financial lifeline. The morning of my birthday, I woke up to the sound of voices and my mother's overly cheerful tone floating up from outside. I peered through my bedroom window and my heart leaped. There was Grandma Eleanor, climbing out of her practical Toyota Camry. I threw on some clothes and rushed downstairs, nearly colliding with Dad in the hallway. The moment she saw me, Grandma Eleanor's face lit up with genuine warmth, something I hadn't seen much of in our house lately. She opened her arms wide, and I practically ran into them. "There's my beautiful girl." She hugged me tight, smelling of fresh-baked cookies and that mild lavender soap she always used. When she pulled back, her eyes were sparkling. "Let me look at you properly. A high school graduate already. What's next for you, sweetheart?" We moved into the living room, where Mom had already arranged the furniture to look like something out of a home decor magazine. I sat next to Grandma on the sofa while my parents perched nervously on the edge of their seats. "Well," I started, trying to ignore my mother's intense stare, "I actually got accepted to several colleges. 2 of them offered me spots." "That's wonderful." Grandma squeezed my hand. "Tell me about them." "The state university offered me a full scholarship," I explained, watching my parents nod approvingly. "And then there's Brington College." I hesitated, knowing my parents thought this option was off the table. "It's a really prestigious private school, but the tuition is about $25,000 a year." Grandma Eleanor nodded thoughtfully, a small smile playing at her lips. She didn't say anything, but something in her expression made me wonder if she was already forming plans of her own. The doorbell started ringing as guests arrived, first Aunt Marie and Uncle Bob, then my cousins, followed by some family friends. Mom rushed around, playing the perfect hostess, while Dad manned the grill in the backyard. But there was one person notably absent: Jake. I tried calling him 3 times, but each time it went straight to voicemail. I asked my mom about him, and she replied he was busy with his auto parts company, but would definitely find time to congratulate me later. The party was in full swing by mid-afternoon. The backyard was filled with the chatter of relatives, family friends, and the smell of grilled food. I tried to enjoy myself, but I couldn't shake the weird vibe coming from my parents. They kept hovering around Grandma Eleanor like anxious satellites, making sure her glass was always full and her plate never empty. I was just finishing a piece of birthday cake when Grandma Eleanor suddenly stood up, tapping her fork against her glass. The chatter died down as everyone turned to look at her. "I'd like to say something," she announced, her voice carrying across the yard. "Today, we're celebrating not just Lila's 18th birthday, but also her acceptance into college." She smiled warmly at me. "Lila, honey, I've watched you grow up into an incredible young woman. Unlike some people," she paused meaningfully, "you've always worked hard and never taken anything for granted." My parents shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. I could see Mom's fingers nervously shredding a paper napkin. When you told me about your acceptance to Brington College, Grandma continued, I could see how much you wanted to go there, even though you thought it was out of reach. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. That's why I've decided to give you a special gift. She walked over and handed me the envelope. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside was a check. When I saw the amount, I thought I was seeing things wrong. I blinked and looked again. $100,000, Grandma announced to the stunned crowd. Enough to cover your tuition at Brington College. The silence lasted for about 3 seconds, before erupting into chaos. Aunt Marie let out a gasp that could have sucked in half the oxygen in the yard. Uncle Bob started clapping, and soon everyone joined in. My cousins were whooping and cheering. I just sat there, staring at the check through tears that wouldn't stop falling. This wasn't just money, it was freedom, opportunity, a chance to go to my dream school without drowning in debt. Grandma, I choked out, standing up to hug her. I can't believe, thank you so much. From the corner of my eye, I could see my parents. They weren't clapping. Mom's face had gone pale, and Dad looked like he'd been hit with a brick. They were whispering to each other, their heads close together, occasionally shooting glances at the check in my hands. I spent most of the evening talking with Grandma Eleanor. She told me stories about her college days and gave me advice about living on campus. It felt like the first time someone in my family was actually excited about my future. The guests gradually filtered out as evening fell, leaving behind empty plates and half-full cups. Grandma Eleanor decided to spend the night, saying she was too tired to drive home. I helped her set up in our guest room, grateful for a few more hours with her. The next morning, after a quick breakfast, Grandma hugged me tight and headed home, promising to call soon to help me plan for college. I watched her car disappear down the street, still hardly believing what had happened. It wasn't until that evening that Jake finally showed up. He walked in without knocking, looking like he'd been sucking on lemons. His expensive designer clothes were wrinkled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. Happy birthday, sis, he mumbled, not quite meeting my eyes. No hug, no card, not even a token gift. He headed straight for the kitchen where our parents were, leaving me standing in the hallway. That evening, the atmosphere at the dinner table was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Jake sat across from me, slouched in his chair and playing with his phone. Dad cleared his throat several times before finally speaking. Lila, honey, we need to have a serious family discussion, he began, setting down his fork. Your brother's been going through a difficult time. His auto parts business, well, things haven't been going as planned. Jake suddenly looked up from his phone, his face drawn. The banks are breathing down my neck, he muttered. I took out some loans to expand the business, but the market crashed, and now they want their money back. I couldn't help but scoff. Really? Because your Instagram shows you vacationing in Hawaii, just last month. With different girls in every photo, by the way. Stay out of my social media, Jake snapped, his face reddening. That's none of your business. Calm down, both of you, Dad interrupted. Lila, this is serious. Your brother could lose everything. I pushed my plate away, my appetite gone. What does any of this have to do with me? Mom and Dad exchanged one of their loaded looks, the kind that made it clear they'd rehearsed this conversation. Well, sweetheart, Mom said, her voice honey-sweet, family always helps family. That's what we've always taught you, right? My blood ran cold as I started to understand where this was going. We think, Dad continued, that the money Grandma gave you could really help Jake out of this situation. I stared at them in disbelief. You want me to give Jake my college money? It makes perfect sense, Jake chimed in, suddenly animated. My business is established. It's more important than some college degree you might not even use. That money is for my education, I protested, my voice rising. Grandma gave it to me specifically for Brington. You got a full ride to state, Mom countered. You can still go to college. But Jake needs this money now. No, the word came out firm and clear. That money is mine. Grandma gave it to me. The change in their faces was instant. Dad exploded out of his chair, his hand clamping around my wrist like a vice. He yanked me away from the table, ignoring my cry of pain. "You'll go to your room right now," he snarled, dragging me toward the stairs. "And you'll stay there until you come to your senses. Don't even think about calling your grandmother. If you breathe a word of this to her, you're out of this house forever. Do you understand me? We'll disown you." I lay in bed that night, listening to the sounds of the house settling. My wrist still ached where Dad had grabbed me. Around midnight, I heard my parents and Jake talking in low, angry voices downstairs, but I couldn't make out the words. Eventually, the house fell silent. By 5 in the morning, I'd made up my mind. I pulled my backpack from under the bed and started packing. Documents first: birth certificate, social security card, high school diploma. My laptop went in next, then some clothes and toiletries. I checked my wallet. I had about $300 saved up from my part-time job at the library. The check from Grandma was safely tucked into a book I kept on my nightstand. I added it to my documents, double-checking that everything important was secure. Moving like a ghost, I crept down the stairs, avoiding the third step that always creaked. The house was dark and quiet except for Dad's snoring from the master bedroom. I grabbed my phone charger from the living room and some granola bars from the kitchen. The morning air was cool as I slipped out the back door. I didn't look back. At the train station, my phone started buzzing. Mom's face flashed on the screen. I declined the call. Then one from Jake, declined. Dad, declined. Messages started flooding in. "Where are you? Come home right now. You're being ridiculous. Think about your brother. If you don't come back immediately, you'll regret it." I turned off notifications and bought a ticket to Massachusetts. The train wouldn't leave for another hour, so I sat in the station's cafe, my backpack clutched tight against my chest, jumping at every sound. It was late afternoon when I finally reached Grandma Eleanor's house. She opened the door and her eyes went wide with surprise. "Lila, what on earth?" She ushered me inside. "Your father called me this morning. He said you'd run off with some boy, that you were planning to waste the college money on parties and—" "That's a lie." The words burst out of me. "They wanted me to give the money to Jake. His business is failing, and they tried to force me to give him my college fund. When I refused, Dad—" I touched my wrist where the bruises were forming. "They locked me in my room and threatened to disown me if I told you." Grandma's face went from concerned to thunderous. Without a word, she pulled out her phone and dialed Dad's number, putting it on speaker. "David? Yes, Lila's here." "Oh, thank God," Dad's voice crackled through the speaker. "Mom, she's been acting out, making up stories." "Save it," Grandma cut him off. "She told me everything. About Jake's failing business, about you trying to steal her college fund, about you threatening her." "Mom, she's lying. She's just being dramatic." I said save it. Grandma's voice could have frozen fire. "I've watched for years as you favored Jake, as you spoiled him rotten while neglecting Lila. I've helped you financially time and time again, hoping you'd change. Well, I'm done. From this moment, you can consider my financial support ended. And I'll be calling my lawyer tomorrow to update my will. You and Jake won't be seeing a penny." She hung up, then turned to me, her face softening. "You'll stay here with me until college starts," she said firmly. "And don't worry about a thing." Living with Grandma Eleanor was like stepping into a different world. Every morning, I'd wake up to the smell of coffee and whatever she was baking. Her specialty was apple pie, but she made amazing blueberry muffins too. I helped around the house, doing the cleaning and laundry. It wasn't because she asked me to, I wanted to contribute somehow. We fell into an easy rhythm together, sharing meals, watching old movies, and talking about everything and nothing. My phone kept buzzing with messages and calls. Mom, Dad, and Jake tried every platform they could think of: phone calls, texts, Facebook, Instagram, even LinkedIn. Their messages ranged from guilt-tripping to angry to manipulative. I ignored them all. The summer passed quietly. Finally, August arrived, and it was time for me to start at Brington. Grandma helped me move into my dorm room, making my bed with fresh sheets and arranging my things just so. My roommate, Sarah, seemed nice, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly excited about my future. The first month of college was a whirlwind of new experiences. Classes were challenging but fascinating, I was making friends, and I'd even joined the campus newspaper. For once, I wasn't living in Jake's shadow, I was just Lila, finding my own path. Then one Tuesday, my resident advisor knocked on my door. "Lila, your parents are here. They're waiting at the campus coffee shop." My stomach dropped, but I knew this confrontation was inevitable. I found them sitting at a corner table, both looking somewhat deflated compared to the last time I'd seen them. "Lila," Mom reached for my hand, but I kept them firmly in my lap. "You look good. What do you want?" I asked, getting straight to the point. Dad shifted uncomfortably. We wanted to apologize. We were wrong to try to take your college money. We were wrong to threaten you. We were wrong about a lot of things." I waited, knowing there was more. "There always was with them. We were hoping," Dad continued, his voice carefully measured, "that maybe you could talk to your grandmother about her will. We're not asking for your money anymore, but—" "No," I said simply. "If you want to fix things with Grandma, you'll have to talk to her yourselves. I'm not getting involved." They exchanged frustrated looks. "Lila, be reasonable," Dad started. "I am being reasonable. For the first time in my life, I'm putting myself first. If you want to repair your relationship with Grandma, that's between you and her." Mom's face hardened. "So that's it? You won't help your family at all?" I stood up, gathering my things. "You know what's funny? When you wanted my college money, it was family helps family. But you never helped me, ever. It only goes one way with you, doesn't it?" 2 months into my first semester at Brington, I got a call from Aunt Marie. I almost didn't answer, she'd always been closer to Mom's side of things, but something made me pick up. "Lila, are you sitting down?" Her voice was hushed, like she was sharing state secrets. "I thought you should know what's happening back home. Jake's business, it's completely gone under. He owes the banks hundreds of thousands. He's moved back in with your parents." I let that sink in. The mighty Jake, who'd always looked down on my modest college plans, was back in his childhood bedroom. "Your parents," Aunt Marie continued, "they're spending their retirement savings to help him with the debts. They're talking about taking out a second mortgage on the house." Later that same week, Grandma called. "I had some visitors today," she said, and I could hear the weariness in her voice. "Your parents showed up on my doorstep. They were begging me to help with Jake's debts. Said they were going to lose everything." She paused. I told them no. Said they needed to handle this situation themselves for once. "How did they take it?" "About as well as you'd expect. Your mother cried, your father got angry. But I stood firm. I told them this was the consequence of years of spoiling Jake rotten while ignoring you." As the semester progressed, more news trickled in through various relatives. Dad had taken a second job. Mom was selling her jewelry. Jake had the audacity to buy a new iPhone while living rent-free on their dime. During fall break, I went to stay with Grandma. We baked pies together, and she helped me with my term paper research. She'd set up a proper guest room for me, with a desk and everything I needed for studying. "Your midterm grades came," she mentioned one evening. "Straight as. I'm so proud of you." "Thanks, Grandma." I hesitated before asking, "Do you ever regret cutting them off?" She set down her knitting and looked at me seriously. "Not for a second. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for people is let them face the consequences of their actions." She was right, of course. Every time I heard about my family's financial struggles, a small part of me felt guilty. But then I'd remember all the years of favoritism, all the Christmases with just a card while Jake got expensive gifts, all the times they dismissed my achievements while celebrating Jake's smallest accomplishments. Now I was thriving at Brington, making friends, earning top grades, and planning for a future I'd chosen. Meanwhile, they were dealing with the consequences of their choices. It wasn't my job to fix their mistakes, it never had been. The last I heard, Jake was talking about some new business idea he had, and my parents were still somehow trying to find ways to fund it. Some patterns are hard to break, I guess. But I had broken free of those patterns, thanks to Grandma's gift and her belief in me.
Wendy. When I turned around after being called from behind, it was my ex-husband, David, and his mistress, whom I hadn't contacted at all since that day. It was the first time I had seen David since our divorce, and he was completely changed. Dressed head to toe in brand name clothes. Having no particular reason to ignore him, I stopped and said, "What do you want?" Surprised by my indifferent attitude, David responded with heightened excitement. "What's with the cold reception? It's hard to believe we were married until recently. More importantly, I'm going to make it big. Is that so? Good for you." "Well, yeah. I'm marrying Kelly, so I'll become the heir to a major company. I feel sorry for finding out later, but since it's come to this, I'll let you know." "That's impossible. After all, your company is under my control." "What? No way. My name is Wendy Anderson. I live with my younger husband, David. I work at the company my father runs, mainly handling clerical work. My father, the president, is responsible for the company's major management strategies. But as I have no siblings, I will eventually take over the company. There are employees who are senior to me, so every day I face the pressure of someday becoming president. I had decided not to talk much about the family business with David. I didn't want to bring work issues into our home. His personable nature was endearing, and he was my daily source of comfort. I thought I could live a happy and enjoyable life with him, but one weekday, I went out to buy a gift for my in-laws' wedding anniversary. Should I buy flowers? Or something they can use every day? I thought, walking along when I heard whispers, "That couple is amazing. They can really do that in the middle of town?" Glancing in that direction, I saw a couple kissing. They're quite passionate for the daytime, I thought, and was about to walk on when I did a double take. I couldn't believe my eyes, the man was David. I didn't recognize the woman with him. "Why? Weren't you supposed to go to work this morning?" No matter how many times I blinked, there was no mistaking it was David. I instinctively started filming them with my smartphone. Shopping was the last thing on my mind now, as I felt driven by a quickening heartbeat of dread to head home. Back at home, I couldn't focus on anything, not laundry, not washing dishes, not preparing dinner. What should I do? I have to finish everything before he comes back, I thought, trying to stand from the chair, but my body felt incredibly heavy, and I sat back down. This repeated several times until night fell, and David returned home. "I'm home. What's wrong?" I opened the photo album on my smartphone and showed him the pictures of him with the woman. "Hey, what's this about? Who is this woman? Tell me the truth." Part of me wanted him to deny it all. "This isn't me. You're mistaken. I was at the office working." I closed my eyes tightly, hoping to hear those words. However, what came was a casual admission of his affair. What? You saw that? Yes, I'm having an affair with the daughter of a company president. David's face, mocking and cold, was unlike any I'd seen before. He seemed to have decided to be defiant, rattling off details I hadn't even asked for. Her name is Kelly Baker. She's pregnant, so I want to divorce you and marry her. They told me to work at Kelly's parents' workplace if we get married. As he spoke so buoyantly, my heart grew colder. I felt foolish for ever thinking he was adorable. It's divorce, divorce. I want to register our marriage with Kelly soon. Yes, of course, let's divorce. I have no reason to refuse. I immediately accepted it. That's the situation, so write it down. With that, David pointed at the divorce papers he had apparently prepared in advance and left the table. He left the house without any fuss, and I was at a loss. It was sad to become strangers to my kind in-laws. But I had to report the divorce. When I met with them, both apologized. I'm really sorry. That guy is disowned. It's not both of your fault, so please don't apologize so much. I said, but they kept their heads down as if blood would rush to their heads. A week later, I called David and his mistress, Kelly, to my house. It wasn't a conversation to have in a cafe or anywhere public. So, much as I disliked it, I invited them to our home. Both of them looked dissatisfied when they were called. And without any greetings like "sorry for intruding." They roughly took off their shoes and sat in the living room chairs. I sat quietly opposite them. I called you here today for no other reason. I'm going to demand compensation for adultery from you both. First, David. You owe me $30,000. And Kelly, you owe me $20,000 each. Thanks to getting a lawyer who specializes in adultery cases. The demand was quite high. However, even after I told them, David and Kelly didn't look upset but smiled smugly. My father will pay the compensation. It's no big deal. From the way she spoke, her haughty character was apparent. She laughed at me through her nose and looked down on me with the same eyes that David had when I showed him the pictures of the affair. Birds of a feather flocked together, I thought absently. The compensation was paid in cash. David and Kelly laughed at me together. You're like a money grubber. You're such a poor person wanting chump change. I watched their faces in silence, thinking, enjoy your smugness while it lasts. And then we disbanded for the day. Afterwards, since my parents' house was close by, I decided to move back in with them. My parents seemed eager to say something about my divorce. But when I told them David had cheated and gotten his mistress pregnant, they were furious. You did the right thing leaving such a man, they repeatedly said, comforting me. Since then, I threw myself into work, and before I knew it, 6 months had passed. One day, a familiar voice called from a distance, "Is that you, Wendy?" Wendy. Why are you here? Startled by the unmistakable voice of my ex-husband David, I turned around to see him and a young woman. She looked to be in her early 20s. With vibrant skin, flashy makeup, and red nails. David, clad in brand-name clothes, seemed a completely different person from when we were together. How dare you stop me when you were the one who wanted a divorce? That's pretty unreasonable. I muttered softly but stopped anyway as I had no particular reason to ignore him. Ah, what do you want? David appeared shocked by my indifferent attitude. What's with the cold reception? Hard to believe we were married until recently. To think I could casually talk to a man who cheated, got his mistress pregnant, and left on his own. Well, we were both young back then. Let me introduce you. This is my new wife, Kelly. We're here shopping for clothes for our soon-to-be born child. More importantly, I'm going to make it big. Is that so? Good for you. Yeah. Since I'm marrying Kelly, the daughter of a company president, I'll become the heir to a major corporation. Interesting. Congratulations. And? Encouraged by my interest, David began to brag. I've been promoted rapidly since marrying Kelly. So, Kelly was your lucky charm, huh? Yeah, her father, the president, recognized my work, and I became his successor. Still, it made me wonder where David could have met such a president's daughter. I was puzzled. What's the company's name? It's Baker Commerce. Hearing the name of the mistress's company made me think. It sounded familiar. After a moment, I remembered that place. And decided to share something with the two, who were looking triumphant. I feel sorry for you finding out later, but I'll tell you anyway. That's impossible. After all, your company, it's under my control. What? No way. What are you joking about? Not funny at all. You're just coasting along on your dad's connections at a company. Oh really? You could keep your dreams to yourself. This is no joke. Although I'm mostly doing clerical work now, I'm learning management skills from my father in preparation to take over as his successor. I have to be mindful of my seniors. And sometimes it gets me down thinking I'm not recognized. So, Baker Commerce, it's under my father's company, and I'm the leading shareholder. Kelly, do you know who owns your parent company? Don't be ridiculous. It's Stone Corporation, right? Yes, I'm the daughter and the heir of Stone. What? David, you know my father is the president of a major corporation, right? It's not strange that his daughter would be a shareholder of one of its subsidiaries. Both of you, do you understand what this means? David, you becoming the successor is impossible because I, the principal shareholder, am against it. I could see David and his mistress's faces turn pale instantly. Well, I didn't know Kelly's company was under that umbrella. Having someone who cheats as a successor is too risky. I will make sure to report this properly. Because if news of the heir of a significant subsidiary being involved in cheating or divorce scandal surfaces, it will tarnish the parent company's reputation, right? Don't you think? As I said this, David, boiling with anger, retorted. You should just keep quiet about it. Yes. Just keep this between us. You must be seeking revenge because I cheated on you. What an awful woman. And what's this about going back to your parents' home now? As a shareholder, you must have a lot of money. You kept quiet about that too. In the past, being the daughter of a wealthy father, I had endured unpleasant things. Your dad is rich, so this should be easy for you, right? I was often forced to treat others or faced with prejudiced views. That's why I chose not to tell anyone. Without changing my expression, I listened to David and then spoke my mind. I don't do things I believe are wrong. I didn't mention being a shareholder because, during our time together, I didn't want to rely on my family's status. But, in the end, not letting go of the shares was like taking out insurance for myself. But after divorcing David, I realized something. Ultimately, I wanted to distance myself from my parents' home. Because I was too aware of it. I am just me, after all. I am grateful to David and Ms. Kelly for teaching me that. What's there to be thankful for? Anyway, thanks for the information. It's good to know before everything was decided. So, wait a minute, are you really the principal shareholder you claim to be? Are you just trying to get back at me for taking David away from you? Are you all living in a fantasy world? Why would I need to lie at this point? If you think it's a lie, then so be it. I'm busy. I'll take my leave now. As I spoke, David and Kelly stood there dumbfounded. But then quickly left as if they had thought of something. Soon after, I received a call from the housekeeper at my parents' home. Miss David, whom I heard you had parted with, has come and is asking to speak with your father. What should we do? It turns out David had gone directly to my parents' home to try and settle things with the president of the parent company, my father. What initiative! I'll be there soon, could you entertain him for now? I said and then hung up. I could send him away immediately, but who knows what he might do next. I've instructed them to let him in, but my father shouldn't be home at this hour, right? I'll listen to what they have to say and then send them home. After making these arrangements internally, I arrived at my parents' house to find David and Kelly being led by the housekeeper from the entrance to the guest room. No sooner had they arrived than they burst out. This is just spite on your part. What kind of company policy is this? Bring out your old man. Really, there's a limit to holding a grudge. Despite themselves being the ones who had a marriage of conquest. I thought it ridiculous. Busy as he was, my father wouldn't be home at this hour. So I played along, all right. If my father is at home, then fine. Otherwise, this conversation never happened. You two have no right to speak on this matter. They both looked frustrated. But given that my father was the president of a major corporation, they had no choice but to comply. I'll check with my father, so wait here. Hurry it up, will you? I knocked on my father's study door. Knock knock. When I opened the door, to my surprise, my father was there. Father. What are you doing here at this hour? I couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. Well, just something. What about you? It's rare for you to come to my study. Well, David and his wife have come over. They want to talk to you. Understood. Let's go. My father and I moved to the guest room where David and Kelly were waiting. So, David. It's been a while since Wendy's wedding. I heard you two had parted, but what brings you here? My father spoke in a calm tone. But his overwhelming presence made David too nervous to speak. Thinking the conversation wouldn't progress this way, I took the lead. I'll explain. The company of Kelly's father, where David is currently working. He plans to marry his new wife Kelly and become the heir there. My father, arms crossed, listened intently to me as he looked towards David and Kelly. The lady here had already met David while he was still married to me. And at the time, it was an affair. And they parted with me so the two of them could be together. I informed them that I would oppose his promotion to president due to his history of infidelity and cheating, using my authority. As I spoke, I thought to myself that this wasn't an explanation I should be giving as someone who had been cheated on and discarded. My father hummed thoughtfully, arms still crossed. In the tense atmosphere, David finally spoke. Please. Our child will be born soon. It doesn't make sense for the husband of the president's daughter not to be the next president. Considering the public perception and everything else. It's a big problem if he can't become the heir because of a grudge from the divorce. Isn't it unprofessional to let personal feelings interfere with company management? I was impressed, in a bad way, that he could say such things to the father of his former spouse. As I was pondering this, my father said, "I understand your desire to be president. Actually, I was in my study today because I was dealing with information that would be troublesome if leaked within the company. And that was about your company, David." After a pause, my father started speaking. "To be straightforward, David, I cannot recommend you as the next president or successor." David reflexively protested. "Why not?" I listened quietly, realizing from my father's tone that my involvement was unlikely to be the reason. "Based on the reports of your background, we knew that Kelly's husband was David. And of course, that you were married. That means we're also aware of the circumstances. That's a concern in itself, but..." My father seemed hesitant to continue. "I shouldn't say this. It involves privacy." My father glanced at David before stopping his explanation. Unconvinced, David pressed him. "What? There's no privacy between spouses. Tell us everything." My father looked awkward. "Indeed, it's terrible to leave things hanging after talking this much. I'll tell you, but I'm not responsible for what happens next. Is that okay with you?" David, Kelly, and I all swallowed nervously. "David, it appears you've been meeting 3 other women since divorcing Wendy. The secretary, a high school girl, and a nightclub worker. This is indefensible. Scandals are a sensitive issue nowadays. We at the top management have determined that this is due to your character. And we have decided not to recommend you as the next president." Even after hearing this, would you still say it's out of spite or personal feelings? By the way, we do have evidence. Upon hearing my father's words, Kelly's face turned bright red. "David, were you deceiving me? I had no idea." "Don't joke around. Our child is about to be born, too. You really lack any sense of responsibility as a father." "Kelly, it may sound harsh, but getting involved with a married man means it's likely the same could happen to you. It's a good lesson, isn't it?" David was no longer concerned with being the successor. "And there's one more thing." "Is there still something else?" "It's about your father, the president of Baker Commerce." "My father?" "We also plan to request his resignation at the next shareholders' meeting." "Why? If David isn't the successor anymore, isn't that enough? Why does my father have to resign over this?" "Well, first, take a look at this." My father handed Kelly a brown envelope filled with documents. Inside were records showing the president had used company funds to support the 2 of them. "What? I don't know about this." "While it's fine if he uses his personal funds for support, using the company's money counts as embezzlement. I have no choice but to act." "That's... Thank you for letting us know. David, we should discuss this matter thoroughly with both of our parents." "Yes." Kelly expressed her gratitude to us and took David back home. My father and I exchanged glances. "The storm has passed." I chuckled. "Indeed," he agreed. Afterward, David was fired from the company, and Kelly filed for divorce, pursuing him for compensation and child support. At the shareholders' meeting, as my father had stated, 5 years later, my mother-in-law passed away, and I attended her funeral. The overcast sky seemed to reflect the sadness in my heart. The friends of my mother-in-law present were quietly shedding tears. "Wendy, thank you for coming today." "No, she was very kind to me during her life." While I was speaking with my father-in-law, a voice interrupted. Hey, Wendy. It's you, right? Turning towards the voice, I saw David in disheveled morning clothes. He appeared much older than his years. Surprised to see him there, I widened my eyes in shock. And my father-in-law looked equally puzzled. Why didn't you invite me, Dad? I'm her real son. Mom must be sad not to see me. David, you were disowned, that's why you weren't invited. You. Did you look up the funeral details yourself? His loud voice was embarrassing. As he approached, my father-in-law stepped back with each word. Well, anyway, I should get part of Mom's inheritance, right? Huh? How can you say such a thing in front of grieving people? The other attendees stared at David in disbelief. There's no money for you. Mom's inheritance will be donated in full to an orphanage. That was her wish. My father-in-law's voice trembled, his forehead vein bulging with anger. What? Then how am I supposed to live? What are you talking about? You're healthy. Work and earn your own money. And please, don't cause a scene during the funeral. Unaware of the cold stares from around him, David turned his gaze from my father-in-law to me and stepped closer. I inadvertently let out a small scream and hastily shut my mouth. Then stepped back like my father-in-law. Then give me back the compensation. Your father's a big company president, so it shouldn't matter, right? Why do you need money so badly? You said the compensation was just spare change back then. David began to explain his current situation. Things have changed. After the divorce, I was fired. I've been to interviews, but no one will hire me. I can't pay back the money I borrowed for compensation. And child support to you and Kelly because I'm unemployed. I have to pay child support every month. I need the money for that. Despite David's pleas, I had no obligation to refund the compensation. Try to find a job and manage your finances to pay it back. As I suggested this, he shook his head and suddenly grabbed my arm strongly. What are you doing? Even though I knew I shouldn't shout in front of others, I couldn't help but react reflexively. Please, I want to remarry you. If we get remarried, the compensation will be returned. And I'll be freed from this debt-ridden life. Stunned and unable to speak, I tried to pull away, but his grip didn't weaken. Do you seriously think I would want to remarry you? There's no way that would happen. The moment I saw you admit to cheating and act so nonchalant about it, any love or other feelings I had for you disappeared. Who was it that accepted the divorce with such insulting remarks at that time? And yet you have the audacity to turn around and press for remarriage. It just feels like you're mocking me. You still love me, don't you? Those words earlier were just you not being honest with your feelings, right? I felt like slapping the man in front of me who was grossly mistaken. However, I am a rational person. To act impulsively would make me no better than someone who cheats without thinking. As I said earlier, I've long since lost any feelings for you. Please let go of me. Just as I said that, someone called my name, overlapping my words. Looking in that direction, I saw a man walking towards me with a little girl. Mama, the girl called out to me in a childish voice as she ran up to me. Who is this girl? She's my daughter. My daughter and I share a striking resemblance. Even without asking, it should be clear we are mother and child. But David seemed unable to accept it, his eyes darting around in confusion. I remarried. My in-laws introduced me to someone. David noticed the matching rings on my and my husband's ring fingers, and his body seemed to deflate, his knees hitting the ground. After the divorce debacle, my mother-in-law had said, "I don't know if it counts as an apology, but I want to introduce you to a wonderful person. He's very serious, kind, and sincere. Would you meet him once?" That's how I met my husband. We had come to the funeral as a family to pay respects, as my mother-in-law had taken good care of us during her lifetime. "Mommy, what's wrong with him?" Pointing at David, who seemed lost to the world. My daughter's voice snapped him back to reality, and he stood up, staggering away as if deflated. "Wendy, I truly apologize. I had no idea he would come here," my father-in-law said. Afterward, my father retired as president and became the chairman. Then sold all his shares, acquiring a substantial fortune. When David noticed me at the funeral, I was startled, wondering if he had caught wind of this. However, now that he knew I had a new husband, he would likely no longer interfere. David was destined to struggle with his debts for the rest of his life. Thanks to my father's wealth, we were able to live a comfortable life. Our daughter was growing healthily, and her capabilities were gradually increasing. Both parents watched over her warmly. My father's face always softened adorably when called Grandpa, his smile deepening. Having become a dependable father and a kind grandfather, I wanted to repay my father for all his help in any way I could, hoping for our family to continue living happily together.
I'm remarrying a 23-year-old wealthy man's daughter. Get the hell out of here, you on welfare. Just 3 days after we separated, I met Greg. Next to him stood a young, beautiful woman. She entwined her arm with Greg's and seemed wary of me. However, I recognized her. Have we met somewhere before? Or am I mistaken? While Greg hurled harsh words at me, I desperately tried to recall who this woman was. Then it hit me. Could it be? I remembered how I first came to know this woman and her true identity. At the same time, I couldn't help but burst into laughter. Hey, what are you laughing at? It's creepy. Sorry, it's just because this woman is that person. My name is Ashley Morris. I'm 32 and single. I've been working as a nursery school teacher, which has been my dream since I was a student. There are tough aspects like pressure from my boss and dealing with parents, but I'm healed every day by the children's smiles as I work hard. Above all, I've always admired nursery school teachers. I can't quit easily. My workplace might change, but I plan to continue as a nursery teacher until retirement. That's what I thought. However, life doesn't always go as planned. One day, at a mixer invited by a friend, I met a man 3 years my senior, Greg. He seems to be an executive at a well-known company around here. He achieved good results and became an executive in his 20s. I guess that's what they call an elite. However, far from bragging about his career, he was a very humble man. Wow, an executive in your 20s? That's amazing. Not really. There were quite a few others besides me. Still, it's impressive to the outside world. Greg and I happened to sit next to each other, and we hit it off as if we weren't strangers. We exchanged contact information and started meeting. After a few dates, our relationship developed. After 3 years of dating, we got married. Greg was very kind to me even while we were dating. He would plan our dates and give me wonderful gifts, not only on special days. Thank you, Greg. I just want to see Ashley happy. He would come up with such cheesy lines, and I was thrilled. I felt fortunate to have met such a wonderful person. However, at that time, I didn't yet know Greg's true nature. After getting married, my life changed dramatically. It began when Greg told me to quit being a nursery school teacher. Why? I intended to continue working even after getting married. Greg had agreed to that. Please. My mom also said it would be better that way. Your mother has nothing to do with our lives, right? She does, doesn't she? Mom said she would support our lives. Why do you want to work so much? You can live on my income alone. I'm not denying that. Indeed, we could live on Greg's income alone, but I was reluctant to quit being a nursery school teacher. After discussing it, I relented. In fact, we had discussed wanting children in the future, and we concluded that it would be more reassuring to have me at home to start a family. It seems that my mother-in-law had suggested the same, and I reluctantly decided to quit my job. After quitting, at Greg's request, we moved close to his parents' home. According to Greg, it would be easier to receive support if our houses were close. It's at least better than living together. That's what I thought, and I accepted the move. I regretted not discussing our married life while we were dating, but that's a secret. If my mother-in-law had a good personality, I would have gladly accepted it. However, her character was far from good. She looked down on me and scrutinized me with judging eyes. I just couldn't accept that. But once Greg and I started living together, I hoped the chances of meeting my mother-in-law would decrease. That was a big misunderstanding. In fact, since we moved close by, my mother-in-law started coming to our house daily. My father-in-law had already passed away, and perhaps she disliked being alone at home. Excuse me, Ashley. What is this frozen food packaging doing here? Every time she visited, my mother-in-law would thoroughly check every corner of the house, even peeking into the trash can. Hey, not there too. You're not letting my son eat lunches filled with frozen food, are you? I do use some frozen food, but not for everything. As a housewife, shouldn't you be making every lunch from scratch? Are you planning to feed our future children frozen food too? Ah, I can't believe I have such an unimaginable daughter-in-law. I'm sorry. Should a housewife not use frozen food? Certainly, I had chosen the path of a full-time housewife. However, it wasn't something I had desired myself. After my mother-in-law had her say and left our house satisfied. Sigh. All I could do was sigh. Day after day, my mother-in-law would come to the house, complain, and leave. There were even times when she came while I was out and told me off. Where are you? I came all this way, so hurry up and let me in the houses. She seemed to enjoy tormenting me and used it as a way to relieve her stress. Although I had refused before, getting told off every time was exhausting. Eventually, I became cautious even when going to the nearby convenience store. However, my mother-in-law continuously repeated one particular phrase. When will you have children? She pressured me every time we met. We still can't have them. What? Are you kidding me? You're infertile, aren't you? Such tactless remarks were typical of her. As far as my mother-in-law was concerned, the inability to have children was all my fault. Greg was definitely not to blame. However, Greg himself was kind to me. He seemed to think that pregnancy was something we should work on as a couple, and he often cared about my health. Don't rush with the kids. Sure, I want to give mom a grandchild, but you're more important to me, right? Right. Thank you. I thought that if we worked together as a couple, we would eventually be blessed with children. However, my hopes never reached fruition. 2 years later, we still hadn't had any children. At that time, my mother-in-law seemed to have given up on having grandchildren and stopped visiting our houses. At the same time, Greg's attitude towards me worsened, and he began to verbally abuse me casually. Perhaps it was the stress of not being able to have children, or maybe he just grew to dislike me. The more I thought about it, the darker my thoughts became. But Greg didn't seem to care about how I felt. Hey, the food. Why isn't it ready yet? Ah, sorry. It'll be ready soon. Ugh, really useless. Can't even cook, can't clean, can't get pregnant. Mom was disgusted. Why did I even marry someone like you? Sorry. I no longer had the energy to fight back, and I just kept apologizing to Greg. Seeing me like this, Greg became even more abusive. He would complain about the food being bad, the cleaning not being thorough. I could even get yelled at for a single strand of hair being out of place. And after hurling abuse at me, he would always say, "That's why you can't get pregnant." I was careful about my diet and health management. I took my temperature, managed my menstrual cycle, and was more cautious than when we first got married. But still, I didn't become pregnant. Initially, it was Greg who refused. I understood he was busy or tired from work. But if he was going to complain about not having children, shouldn't he be cooperating? If you're going to say that, then help out. This isn't something I can handle alone. Ugh, shut up. Haven't I told you I'm tired? No matter how I tried to reason with him, Greg would only say he was tired and showed no signs of willingness to cooperate. If Greg wasn't going to help, there was nothing I could do. Whenever I had a moment to myself, I would wonder how things had come to this. Was this the married life I had envisioned? I vaguely thought that our relationship, which had completely cooled, might never return to how it was before. 6 months later, our relationship had cooled even further. Eventually, Greg stopped coming home altogether. He claimed it was due to sudden overtime or drinking parties. He said he had work on holidays too, so he spent very little time at home. I figured he must have given up on me and was probably cheating. If only he would just say he wanted a divorce. In the end, I had no choice but to live a lonely life at home by myself. Greg occasionally came home, but he continued to spew verbal abuse at me. Why do you always look so miserable? It's disgusting. Sorry. Where had the Greg I married gone? The Greg from those days wasn't someone who would call people disgusting. All I could do was apologize, trying not to upset him further. However, one day, after finishing shopping for dinner and returning home, Greg was there unusually. Oh, what's up? Ah, Ashley. Finally back, huh? Greg spoke cheerfully. What was he planning? I braced myself and waited for his words when he suddenly handed me a piece of paper. It was a divorce paper. Huh, a divorce. Yeah, I don't need you anymore. There's no point in us being married. Go ahead, become homeless, or get on welfare. So, that's how it is. Alongside the sadness of being clearly told I was no longer needed, I felt a sense of relief that I could finally escape this life. I understand. I accepted the divorce without hesitation. Perhaps because I accepted it so quickly, Greg seemed slightly surprised. I signed the divorce papers and handed them to Greg. At that moment, I felt like I was released from everything and let out a big sigh. Greg told me to get out by the next day, so I went back to my room and packed the essentials. The next day, while Greg was at work, I left the houses and headed to my parents' houses. I had contacted my parents, but they seemed worried now that I was actually coming home. You can stay at home as long as you need. There's no rush. Encouraged by my mother's words, I decided to face tomorrow with renewed effort. 3 days after the divorce, my heart was still healing, but I knew I had to move forward. I needed to find a job, so I looked through magazines and online for job listings. Perhaps due to labor shortages, there were many openings for nursery school teachers. Maybe I should become a nursery teacher again. I saved a few listings that caught my interest. Looking at the clock, it was past 4 p.m. I had been looking at listings for an hour. I decided to go outside for a change of pace. I didn't have any particular errand, I just wanted to take a walk. I reminisced about walking this path to school or working as a part-timer at this grocery store. However, just as I was about to head home after wandering around for about 30 minutes, I saw a familiar figure. Greg? What? Ashley. In front of me stood Greg, and next to him was an unfamiliar woman, much younger and more beautiful than either Greg or me. The woman intertwined her arm with Greg's and looked at me warily. Why are you here? That's my line. Why are you here? Shut up. It's none of your business. Greg did not want to answer my question. Hey, Greg, who is this woman? Oh, she's my ex-wife. Don't worry about her, Vanessa. Ex-wife? The woman, referred to as Vanessa, was acting flirtatiously, though it only made her seem more like a bimbo. Yet, I felt another emotion upon seeing Vanessa. She seemed familiar. Had we ever met before? Who is she? My current wife. Mom introduced us. What? Wife? That's right. Just 3 days after our divorce, and he's already remarried. My mind went blank. To add insult to injury, Vanessa revealed a shocking fact. We're going to have a baby in a few months. A baby? Considering the size of Vanessa's belly, she seemed to have been pregnant for more than half a year. That time frame overlaps with when Greg stopped coming home. Had they been connected since then? Anyway, Greg looked at Vanessa's face and once again forced reality upon me. I'm remarrying a 23-year-old wealthy man's daughter. Get the hell out of here, you on welfare. Greg said this and burst into a dirty laugh, which Vanessa joined with a high-pitched giggle. I'm not on welfare. Shut up. Stop pretending. Then Greg and Vanessa burst into laughter again. I felt miserable and was about to cry. However, as I glanced at Vanessa's face, I realized something. The déjà vu I had been feeling since earlier, and the fact that Vanessa was a wealthy man's daughter. Everything connected. At the same time, my tears receded and laughter welled up inside me. Ha ha. My sudden laughter made them step back a bit. Why is she laughing? Gross. Can't handle this. Shall we go? Disgusted by me, the two of them quickly left the scene. The reason I laughed at Vanessa was that I knew her real identity. Indeed, Vanessa is a wealthy man's daughter. However, it's not a successful wealth. In fact, her parents' company, which they managed, was on the brink of bankruptcy. A little while ago, when I was reading job sites and magazines, Vanessa was introduced as a wealthy man's daughter with a photo. It's rare for a wealthy family to introduce their daughter like that, which is why it stuck in my memory. When I later researched the company owned by the wealthy family, various bulletin boards and review sites mentioned it was close to bankruptcy, and indeed, it seemed to be in quite precarious management. Bankruptcy seemed imminent. It was that much of a troubled company. Maybe this could work. Seeing Greg happy, and the fact that his mother introduced Vanessa, watching all this, something inside me crumbled. I was determined to teach them a lesson with my own hands. They might be happy now, but I'll definitely plunge them into the depths of misery. The first thing I did to bring them down was to offer them a direct apology. A few days after meeting Greg again, I contacted Greg, apologized for laughing, and expressed my desire to give them a baby shower gift. Initially cautious, Greg accepted my request once he saw I was remorseful. However, this was merely a part of my strategy. I wanted to claim damages from Greg and Vanessa through a lawyer, but I had no solid evidence. So, pretending to be remorseful, I called them out to let them spill everything about how they met and the baby, recording everything to submit to the lawyer. A week later, I was at a cafe near my parents' home. Greg and Vanessa arrived about 10 minutes past our meeting time. Sorry. They sat down in front of me without any remorse, still arm in arm, flaunting their affection. Sorry for calling you out suddenly. I was thinking about how rude I was last time we met. I wanted to apologize. Also, isn't your child due soon? I was wondering if I could give you a baby shower gift. Really? Wow, you're so thoughtful. Greg and Vanessa were elated, unaware of everything. By the way, you met through your mother, right? I'd love to hear more about it. As I said this, I discreetly started recording with my smartphone. You want to know? Can't help it then? Greg began talking eagerly, with Vanessa looking at him adoringly. To anyone else, it might seem like a sweet couple's story, but it was far from that. That time was really tough, huh? Yeah, but I'm happy to be with Greg now. Vanessa clung to Greg, who relaxed his expression. Honestly, it was nauseating seeing Greg dote on a younger woman. The two of them fell right into my trap, telling each other how much they loved one another. Of course, I was recording everything. This should definitely serve as solid evidence. Isn't it great to remarry someone younger? Of course, I'm truly happy every day. Right, Vanessa? Yeah. So happy. Their lovey-dovey talk lasted over an hour. It was hard to keep smiling and nodding, but the more comfortably they talked, the more advantageous it was for me. 3 hours later, we all went our separate ways. I went home and replayed the recordings. Everything was recorded clearly. I then contacted the law firm I had in mind. After a day's activities, I flopped onto my bed. Greg and Vanessa's happy faces wouldn't leave my mind. It seemed he was happier with her than when he was with me. When did he start to dislike me? Sigh. Before our marriage, I only saw the good sides of Greg, and now I was painfully aware of it. 2 weeks later, I called them to a nearby station, saying I wanted them to see the actual baby gift. They arrived about 10 minutes late, arm in arm as usual. Putting so much effort into seeing the actual gift, huh? You seemed so sad before, but you're actually celebrating for us. Yeah, so happy. Happy indeed. They were as close as ever, but their happiness would only last until this moment. Shall we go? I led them to a taxi. Our destination was the law office. Unaware of anything, they continued to flirt in the taxi, impressively unconcerned about public eyes. A few minutes later, the taxi arrived at the law office. The blissfully unaware couple followed me without any suspicion, but Greg realized something was amiss as we entered. Hey, what's this place? He shouted, but it was too late. Guided by the receptionist, they were led into a conference room. Were you tricking us? What do you mean? The two of them were yelling loudly, but the lawyer present calmed them down. Did you really think I was going to give you a baby shower gift? Thanks for coming all this way. What? As the two flustered people sat down, the lawyer explained what was happening and why I had taken such actions. Really, you're the worst. What's with this person? We're already divorced, right? We don't have anything to do with compensation. I am going to sue you for the abuses of me, especially under your cheating. You can still claim such compensation after a divorce, you know? All the lovey-dovey talk you happily shared at the cafe has been recorded and submitted, and the fact of your affair hasn't changed. Greg sighed deeply and leaned back in his chair, but he sat up quickly when the lawyer mentioned the amount of compensation being demanded. $15,000? That's impossible. I can't pay that either. What? Can't pay? Why don't you ask her parents? Vanessa made a displeased face at my words. I pressed further, knowing her situation. Oh, but that might be difficult. Her parents' company is about to go bankrupt, isn't it? So no funds, huh? Bankrupt? What do you mean? The company was doing well. Greg, who hadn't been informed, widened his eyes and looked at Vanessa. Realizing she couldn't escape the truth any longer, Vanessa suddenly changed her demeanor and began to talk. So it's all come out. Then no need to hide it. Yes, my parents' company is on the brink of bankruptcy. Ever since I met this old man, the business has been failing. So I thought I'd milk him for all he's worth and then leave. I never expected to get pregnant. You, calling me an old man. What? You just realized? I never wanted to marry someone like you in the first place. But since I got pregnant, I had no choice. Really, you're the worst. I can't do this anymore. I want a divorce as soon as possible." With that, Vanessa burst into high laughter. She seemed like a completely different person. Naturally, Greg was shocked by Vanessa's demeanor. "So you've been thinking that about me. I'm tired of acting. Now that it's come to this, I'm leaving you. I can't stand living with an old man like you." Vanessa, the couple, who had seemed so happy up until a moment ago, broke down so easily. While I hadn't known exactly how Vanessa felt about Greg, since I orchestrated this meeting, I was satisfied with the outcome. Eventually, Greg agreed to pay the compensation in a lump sum. I worried Greg might try to escape his obligations as his payment was delayed. However, a month later, that worry was resolved when Greg called me. As soon as I answered, he pleaded, "Help me." It turned out that his affair had been discovered at his company, making it difficult for him to stay, and he chose to resign. He had spent most of his savings on Vanessa, and now, broke and divorced, he had no one to turn to. "Hey, can we get back together? I don't have money for the compensation. Vanessa left me for another man, and I heard her company went bankrupt. I don't know what to do." Despite his almost tearful call, I had no intention of getting back together. "Get back together? Don't make me laugh. Your problems with that woman running away or not having money are none of my concern. If you hadn't done anything strange, none of this would have happened. Just take responsibility." After I sharply responded, Greg hung up without another word. The next day, whether he borrowed money or not, the full amount I demanded was transferred into my account. I didn't hear from Greg again after that. I'm now living at home and have started working as a nursery school teacher again. Indeed, the smiles of the children are bright. The work environment is better than before, and I enjoy my job every day. Getting divorced from Greg was the right decision. I have no plans to marry again anytime soon. Just like I thought years ago, I hope to continue being a nursery teacher until retirement, taking care of my health and living well.
My name is Rebecca Brown. I've been married for 4 years, but we don't have children. If we can't have children, it's fine as long as we live happily as a couple. And if I have a lifelong, trustworthy best friend, I think that's enough for happiness. One day, my best friend Mary came to our house and said she was pregnant. What? Mary, you're single, right? Are you planning to have the baby alone? I don't plan to have it alone. Looking at my husband, he seemed not so much surprised as he was laughing like he knew everything already. I thought, did he know about this? Not planning to have it alone means you're getting married, right? Oh, so you're finally getting married. Congratulations. That's wonderful. At that moment, I was genuinely happy. Raising a child alone is hard, so getting married seemed like the best option. So, who was the lucky guy? President candidate. Wow, really? Good for you. You always said you wanted to marry a rich man. So you finally caught one? Yes. So, the fortune is mine. The future is secure. Saying this, she smiled challengingly. And then, she made eye contact with my husband Steve. Seeing this, I couldn't help but think, wait. Is this? No, it can't be. Probably my face showed my disbelief, because Mary said mockingly. Yes, the guy is your husband, Steve. What? I turned to my husband in shock, and there he was, making a mocking face too. I prioritized having children. I want a divorce. A dream. I pinched my cheek, but there was no waking up from this reality, and the pain told me it was all true. What do you mean? It's pretty clear. Staying with you, there's no chance of having kids. No kids means no successor. Basically, you're useless. If you divorce me, you'll be in trouble, you know? No trouble at all. I'm guaranteed to be the next president. Indeed, my husband is a candidate for president. But that's just it, a candidate. If he divorces me, he would likely be removed from contention. However, it seems he hasn't considered that at all. That company is already mine. When I become president, I'll kick your father out of the company. I'm sick of him holding me back. Then, the child we'll have will be the successor. With that, the company's future and ours are secure, all thanks to Mary. Are you serious? Of course. I've been waiting for this chance. Even though you're not president yet? I will be soon, so there's nothing to worry about. With that, my husband sat back smugly, and Mary smiled satisfactorily next to him. To think I believed you were my best friend, and you'd steal my husband. Until now, you were the rich girl and I was the poor one. I endured this unfairness. Whenever we went shopping, I could only afford cheap stuff, while you shopped at expensive stores. Do you know how frustrating that was? I can't wait for your father to be kicked out of the company so our roles can reverse. I'll shop at luxury stores, and you'll only afford discounted goods. How exhilarating that will be. You're lying. You stole someone's husband just for that? You wouldn't understand my frustration, so you say that. But it's really lucky you're infertile. Me, infertile? Since you can't have kids, that means you're infertile. That's right. You're infertile, so there's nothing you can do. It's not my fault I strayed, you couldn't have kids. As a president candidate, it's also my duty to have a successor, after all. So what happens if we divorce? Nothing much. Even if you are the president's daughter, it will soon mean nothing. So, you really think that? Yes, I do. You're worthless. Value. Well, fine. If that's how it is, let's get a divorce. I never dreamed my best friend would take you. But if that's your relationship, it's better you two marry for the sake of the child. I felt a great fatigue and was resigned to whatever came next. I had no intention of chasing after a cheater. But there was one thing I wanted to know. I'll agree to the divorce, but how long has this been going on? Oh. It started about 3 years after you got married. So, a year ago. Yes. He consulted with me. We can't have children. We've been married 2 years with no kids, tried treatments, but nothing worked. Without a child, there would be no successor. Indeed, no children then. That's when I suggested he should take a lover. A best friend suggests that? I never once thought of you as a friend. No. That's true. You're the only one who thought we were friends. That's why I made that suggestion to him. And Steve accepted your suggestion. Yes. Indeed, if the lover has a child, that child can be the successor. But why Mary as the mistress? That's simple. A man and a woman are together, and things just happen. So it's not because you two are in love? It's a match of interests. Love will eventually fade away, but mutual interests won't. So, I'll have Mary bear my child, and that child will be my successor. Then, I can be both the father of the successor and the president. In my old age, I can pass the president role to my child, and we will be secure. Calculating. Whether it's calculating or not, as long as we're happy, that's all that matters. Is that truly happiness? Happiness is different for everyone. You're just accepting it, aren't you? Your marriage to me was similar. Our marriage? Yeah, you might have felt love for me, but I never loved you. The only thing I loved was your background. A big company president as a father. Without that, marrying you would have been unthinkable. So that's why you were cooperative with the fertility treatments? Yes, exactly. We needed to find out where the problem was. If it turned out I was the issue, then there would be no hope for a successor. If I couldn't have children with a mistress either, then I'd have to think of another strategy. So, I definitely wanted to clear that up. But, in the end, it turned out I'm not to blame at all, so I could confidently go ahead and have a mistress. I see, that's how it is. Now you understand, right? I don't love you. Now that things are clear, please sign the divorce papers. Fine. Being married to someone who doesn't love me is unthinkable. And, I'll take this house. This house? Yes, this house. There's no mortgage, and it doesn't cost me anything to keep it. There's no reason not to take it. Fine by me. I don't care. Great, I'll live here happily with the child and the three of us. By the way, is the baby a boy? It's not certain yet, but it's probably a boy. What if it's a girl? If it's a girl, then we'll just have to have a second one. Then, I'll marry her off to a corporate heir. A marriage of convenience. Yes, I won't let the children do as they please. They will marry someone who can benefit our company. After all, if we're raising them, they should at least bring us some benefits. Disgusting. That's how the rich are. What an image you have. In this day and age, no one wants parents like that. Say whatever you want. It's not about trends. We have to keep having children and raise them to be useful for the company. That way, the parents make a fortune. That's abuse. It's for the children's happiness. So, leave all the furniture here when you go. I don't understand your so, but okay. It would be a hassle to take the furniture from here. I don't plan on taking anything except what's mine. You talk strangely. Oh, right. Because you bought them with Steve, they're not yours. I can't understand the mindset of the rich. Right, Steve? Yeah. Sorry to ruin your good mood, but... I said that and handed the divorce papers to my husband, then stood up. I went to the bedroom and brought back an envelope. When we had fertility treatments, I didn't tell you the results. You are sterile. Huh, sterile? You thought I was infertile, but it's you who's infertile. No way, you never said anything. If I had told you, you would have been overjoyed to cheat, right? If it wasn't going to happen anyway, you thought anything was okay. But even if I didn't say it, the result would have been the same. That's ridiculous. How could that be? The evidence is right here. He pointed at Mary's stomach, but Mary's face had turned pale. Huh, so this child is. If it turns out the mistress's lover's child, father wouldn't acknowledge it. That's crazy. And I'm passing on the debt to you. Debt? What are you talking about? You'll find out soon. So that's that. Enjoy your newlywed life, I'm done here. I'll come back for my things later. After dropping that bombshell, I left the house. From inside, I could hear Steve's serious voice. What do you mean I'm sterile? If I'm sterile, how could you get pregnant? Whose child is it? That's. There was another man besides me? That's. Tell me everything, spill it all. Stop, don't be violent. I'm pregnant. If the child isn't useful, then there's no point. Why were you cheating with another man? But I just really wanted to get married. I really wanted to be with Steve. You kept saying you'd divorce, but you never did. And a child, we never managed to have one. I thought if I didn't do something, another woman would end up having his child, so I panicked. Another woman? Yes, if I had a child quickly, Steve could relax, knowing the succession issue was resolved. That's true, but I thought my position would be secure if I could have a child. And then, when I really did get pregnant, you said we'd divorce immediately. I thought everything would go well. But who could have guessed that Steve was sterile? Yeah, I'm shocked too. It was all for you, Steve. That's right. It really was. If I'm sterile, then all we need to do is safely have and raise this child. If we make this child the successor, everything will work out. So, no matter what, this child has to be a boy. That's right, if we can't have any more children. Even if this one is a girl, I can have another child with another man. If that child is a boy, he can be the successor. I see. No matter the truth from you, Rebecca, if I deny it and say, look, there is a child, no one can further deny that. If it's you and me, we can make that happen. That's right, this is a match of interests. If it's for making a child a successor, I'll do whatever it takes with other men. And I'll make sure to carry a boy. That's right. Since I don't love you, it doesn't matter what happens with other men. That's right, a perfect win-win. Yes, exactly. Win-win. Rebecca has no children. No matter how things turn out, they have to make this child the successor. That means they have no choice but to make me from a president candidate to the next president. Just to clarify, there's no chance they'll make Rebecca the president, right? That won't happen. No matter that Rebecca is the daughter, she's a woman. There's no way a woman will become the president. That's right. A woman as a president, especially of such a large corporation, just doesn't happen. Yes, that's right. So, you must safely deliver the baby in your belly. With that decision made, the two of them submitted the divorce papers to the city hall. About 2 weeks later, they filed the marriage registration and contacted me with great joy. Rebecca. Ah, Mary. You seem in high spirits. Of course. We just officially became husband and wife. Now there's nothing to worry about. What were you worried about until now? After stealing someone else's husband. You don't think another woman could take him just because you're married, do you? Even if he is taken, I won't agree to a divorce. He can play around elsewhere as he likes. I'll do as I please too. Is that what marriage is? Yes, it's the new form of marriage. If that works for you, then fine. I can't understand it. You're just too rigid. Anyway, congratulations. Now I'm soon to be the president's wife. How about it? Want to go shopping together sometime? You're still the president's daughter, so you can shop elegantly, right? Sure, I'm not short on money, but I'll absolutely not go shopping with you. No need to hold a grudge. I'm not holding a grudge. I just don't need to hang out with someone who's not a friend. Well, that's fine. Do as you like. I've secured my seat as the wife of a large corporation's president. Is that why you called? Yes. I just had to tell you. I see, well understood. I'm busy, so I'm going to hang up now. After hanging up, I looked at the disconnected smartphone and smiled. This is just the beginning. I'll teach you just how selfish and full of holes your actions are. Be prepared. Muttering this, I started to act on a certain plan. A few days later, I called Steve to initiate my plan. Long time no see. Congratulations on your marriage. Hey, thanks to you giving up on me, we're happily married over here. Is that so? By the way, please return the house. What? Return the house? After all this time? You said you didn't want it. I never said I didn't want it. When you said you would take it, I just said I didn't mind. That's why I emphasized it so many times. Me not minding means I don't know about anyone else's opinion. What? What are you talking about? That house is yours, right? I can't afford such a large house. That house is my father's asset. The president's? Yes, when my father got married, he lent it to us for free. So now that we're divorced, it needs to be returned. That's ridiculous. You might think so, but this is reality. You just didn't know the reality. So, you're telling me to get out? That's what it comes down to. All the furniture in that house was bought by my father, so you can't take anything with you. If we're kicked out of here, where are we supposed to go? We're about to have a child. That's your problem, so I don't know. Can't you do something? No, I can't. If you stay there, it'll lead to a lawsuit for unlawful detention. Unlawful detention? You're going to be the president, so it's better for you not to be questioned for a crime, don't you think? That's true, but if you become a criminal, your dream of being the president will vanish. So, it's decided that I'm going to be the president? Yes, you're going to be the president. That's great. Then, there's no problem leaving this house. I might as well rent a luxury apartment. Well, it's up to you what you do. Do you know when the official appointment will be announced? The one about me becoming the president. It should be very soon. Is that so? I'm really going to be the president, huh? It has to be me, no one else could be the president. Congratulations. Ah, thank you. Despite the divorce, you still care about me, you really did love me. I thought. As if. How could you even think I loved you? What an idiot. However, Steve happily ended the call. Sometime later, Steve received his appointment. But the document appointed him as the president of a subsidiary, not the main company. Why am I being sent to a subsidiary? It was supposed to be the main company's president. Upon hearing it was a subsidiary, Mary was furious. No, it's just the first step. I'll be the president at the subsidiary, and if I improve performance there, then it will be the main company. Yes, in about 3 to 5 years, I should be able to become the president of the main company. Really? Yes, really. Naturally. But anyway, I'm still a president now. Good thing I rented this luxury apartment. If I hadn't become a president, I wouldn't have been able to afford the rent. But it turns out the information from Rebecca wasn't false. That's good, if you can really get back to the main company. Did you talk to the president about the child? No, now that it's come to this, there's no need to talk. It's settled that I'll become the main company's president. After that, I'll make sure the current president becomes the chairman. Then, I'll kick that person out of the main company. With that, the company will be mine. Make sure you secure it. Of course. Then you'll have to give birth to about 5 kids, doesn't matter if they're boys or girls. We'll marry them off strategically to expand the company. Leave it to me. However, the subsidiary's performance did not improve as the two had hoped. Has the performance improved? That's the thing, it's completely hopeless. Why? It's been a year? You've been president for a year and it's still hopeless. You can't become the main company's president like this. That's true. I've been trying, but for some reason, the sales just won't go up. Why don't you crack the whip on your employees? Threaten to fire them if they don't get new clients, they'll probably try harder. If there are employees who can't work hard for the company, it's better if they're not around. It'll save on personnel costs. That's a good point. As long as there are a few employees, let them make the others work harder. That's the way. Harassed daily by Mary about progress, Steve took the drastic step of firing employees who couldn't develop new business. As a result, the remaining employees had to handle even more work, and the company's operations started to falter. However, oblivious to this reality, Steve and Mary became tyrants, running the company as they pleased. Then, a personnel transfer notice was issued. There's a personnel transfer notice. Mary, acting like the president's wife, would come to the company every day and boss around the employees. One day, she eagerly read the notice, hoping it was about moving to the main company. What's this? What? It's about Steve moving to the main company, right? No. Rebecca has been appointed as the president of the main company. What? You're joking. Stop joking around. Shocked and panicked, Mary read the notice, and indeed, my name was listed there, Representative Director President, Rebecca Brown. Why has this happened? This is ridiculous. A woman as the president of such a large company. Steve. Go to the main office and complain. Spurred on by Mary, Steve hurried to the president's office. Hey. What's this all about? Arriving at the president's office, Steve slammed the personnel notice on the large desk. Is there something wrong with this personnel notice? Did you find a typo? That's not it. Why are you the president? It was decided by the board of directors. I didn't participate in the board meeting. You're on assignment, right? You don't even have the right to attend the meetings. What? Even though I'm on assignment, I'm still part of the main company. That's true. But if someone from the main company is embezzling, they can't really be considered part of it, can they? What? What I had placed on the desk was evidence of embezzlement. It detailed the embezzlement Steve had committed while he was at the main company. You hid it quite cleverly, using your position as a manager, but you didn't think it would be discovered? Silent, huh? Anyway, someone like you could never become a president with actions like these. This kind of thing. Everyone does this kind of thing, don't they? Sure, if you check thoroughly, even a clerk might be taking home pens or making personal copies. But, embezzling such a large amount of money and denying it? Moreover, doing this less than a year after being assigned? The evidence I presented was of the embezzlement at the subsidiary. I don't know about this. I haven't done such a thing at the current company. Do you think I can believe that? This isn't something I did. In reality, the previous president had committed the embezzlement. Knowing this, I had been saving this information to corner Steve. There's evidence right here. You can see it in this ledger. There's unauthorized withdrawal, isn't there? I've just been assigned, I wouldn't do such a thing at the assignment place. Even though you say you've just been assigned, it's been a year. And since you did it at the main office, saying you haven't done it isn't believable. Besides, you have a lot of debt, don't you? Didn't you use it for that? How do you know that? This is a corporation, a major one at that. We thoroughly investigate people we can't trust. When I looked into it, it seems you've borrowed quite a sum. Expecting me to believe you under these circumstances is impossible. Plus, you keep firing employees who don't perform as you wish, burdening the remaining staff with even more work and forcing them to do unpaid overtime. Do you think a company can function this way? Employees aren't robots generating money for you to embezzle. I really don't know anything about it. I haven't done anything. This is a conspiracy. Someone is trying to frame me. Bringing down a small fry like you wouldn't benefit anyone. Or is someone holding a grudge against you? I haven't done anything to be resented by anyone. I resent you, though. Anyway, normally this would be a case for disciplinary action, but if we fire you, you won't be able to repay the embezzled money. Can I remain as the president? Well, our company will sever ties with you. But I'll give you that subsidiary. That company for me? Yes. You're going to have a child soon, right? Work hard to grow that company and pass on the president's chair to your child. Of course, you'll have to fully repay the embezzled amount. This way, your future is secure, right? Ah, thank you. Rebecca really does care about me. I truly appreciate it. I thought, no need for thanks. Like you could grow that company. Steve happily returned to Mary, but he was oblivious that the real hell was just beginning. The subsidiary had no funds. Cut off from the main company and with previous misappropriations by the former president, there was no money to pay suppliers. Suppliers were demanding payments, and without their materials, nothing could proceed. Furthermore, employees gradually resigned, requiring severance payments. This made it even difficult to pay salaries. Eventually, Steve was left alone in the company, and the few who came for interviews were worthless. No decent person showed up. Of course, I had a hand in this situation. It's hopeless. Why does everything I do fail? It would be better if the company didn't exist. Thinking this, Steve finally decided to close the company. However, he couldn't resolve the payments to suppliers, who then sued him. With no work and unable to repay, he ultimately declared bankruptcy, leading him to a miserable life. Every day, Mary would berate him, blaming his sloppy planning for their downfall. If you had let me handle it, it would have been fine, but all you told were lies. This is the worst. Mary continued to scream, and the child, frightened by her voice, cried. Steve always had to console the child. Amidst this, a bill for compensation arrived. Huh, what? This bill for compensation? What's going on? It was the compensation from when I divorced Steve. More than a year had passed since our divorce, but I decided now was the time to claim it. Given that we both were presidents, I demanded a significant amount. Steve was shocked, having not anticipated this. I've declared bankruptcy, so I shouldn't have to pay. When the bill arrived, Steve called, screaming. Oh, that's too bad. Even if you declare bankruptcy, you still have an obligation to pay compensation. That's ridiculous. Steve aged rapidly from the shock, his hair turning white. But that wasn't the end, as Mary, burdened by the compensation, left him with their child. Left alone, Steve desperately asked me for a chance to start over, but I had no intention of reconciling with such a calculating person. I told him, I hope you fall into hell. And hung up. After that, Steve, unable to afford the rent for the luxury apartment, moved to a dilapidated apartment. Despite his luxurious tastes, he couldn't do anything about his situation. He tried to start over, but the only company that hired him was a small sales firm. Knowing he had found a job, I decided to send him a bill for the embezzled amount. He said he shouldn't have to pay because he had declared bankruptcy, but embezzlement obligations don't disappear so easily. Despite visiting several lawyers, the answer was the same. When he asked them to defend him, knowing I was the opponent, no one would take his case, and he ended up paying a substantial amount. However, with the compensation on top of the embezzlement money, he struggled, and eventually committed embezzlement at his new job, got caught, and ended up in prison. Now, without the struggle of living, he wouldn't have any troubles until his release, but after that, a massive debt would still be waiting, making his life unbearable. As for Mary, I checked to see how she was doing. She had put their child up for adoption and was enjoying a romance with a wealthy man. However, there was a catch. This man was involved in shady business dealings, and eventually, like Steve, she ended up in prison. The world is full of pitfalls you never see coming. Has that poor old hag finally kicked the bucket? I glared at the man, annoyed by his words. My ex-husband, who ran off with his mistress, leaving his blind mother behind. It was hard to believe he was the son of that once kind-hearted woman. His crude remarks brought my anger to its boiling point. You must have had it rough, huh? Well, now you're free. But, come on, someone your age, there's only so much freedom you can enjoy, right? His obnoxious laughter echoed as I smiled sweetly, hiding my fury. Yeah, I got the $3 million inheritance. So I'll be living freely from now on. The smile vanished from my ex-husband's face. Little did he know, soon he'd be on his knees begging for my forgiveness. My name is Emily. I'm 63 years old. I got married young and ended up living with my in-laws. They were kind people, but my husband was a disappointment. We divorced 10 years ago when I was 53. At that time, our eldest daughter, Mia, was 18, and our son, John, was 15, right when education costs were the highest. On top of that, my mother-in-law was blind. Taking care of the kids and my mother-in-law was far from easy. I met my husband, Tom, at work. I was 18 when I joined the company, and he was 24, 2 years out of college. He was older than me and seemed reliable, so I admired him. Tom was always looking after me when I was still inexperienced, and he had a caring nature. Despite being popular, for some reason, he took a liking to me and asked me out. When we got engaged, I visited his parents for the first time. His father had trouble walking, and his mother was blind. I was deeply moved, seeing how Tom supported them while managing his job. However, my own parents were against the marriage. They were worried that marrying into a family with obvious caregiving responsibilities would be too much for me. But Tom's parents were such wonderful people, and I was still young. I ignored my parents' concerns and went ahead with the marriage. My parents were so angry that they cut ties with me, but by then, I had a new family. When you're young, you feel invincible. Nothing seemed scary at the time. After we got married, I quit my job. I took it upon myself to care for my in-laws and manage the household, so that my husband could focus on his work. My in-laws were so grateful to me and treated me like their own daughter. They always expressed their thanks and never forgot to show their concern for me. Spending so much time with them made caregiving challenging, but it wasn't a burden. My husband worked late every day, and I believed everything was going well in our home. One day, I ran into an old colleague from work while coming back from the grocery store. Naturally, the conversation turned to my husband and me. My colleague said, "Tom is such a great husband. He always leaves work early because he says you're having a hard time. He's really something, isn't he?" I couldn't believe my ears. Tom never came home before 10 p.m. That was hardly early. It had to be some sort of mistake. Still, I couldn't say anything at the time. So I awkwardly smiled and replied, "Yes, that's right." Later that evening, I mentioned it to my husband, intending to test him a little. "You've been coming home late a lot lately. Couldn't you come back earlier? Your dad seems to feel bad about having me, a woman, help him with everything. At least you could help him with his bath." But before I could finish, Tom yelled at me. "What? I'm working. I'm not playing around. Tell Dad to stop being so picky." Your father didn't say anything. I just thought he might feel that way. It was clear my husband had no intention of helping with the caregiving. On top of that, he seemed overly defensive. I had a sinking feeling that my suspicions were right. But at the time, I couldn't bring myself to acknowledge it. I was afraid of what would happen if I pressed him and uncovered something I didn't want to know. After all, I had married him against my parents' wishes, and I had nowhere to go. I also worried about my in-laws. In the end, I decided to continue on with my life as usual. One day, I thought about getting an electric wheelchair for my father-in-law. He was using a cane and a regular wheelchair. But with an electric one, he could enjoy short walks. I imagined pushing my blind mother-in-law in her wheelchair alongside him, so we could all go a bit farther on our outings. I shared the idea with my husband, fully expecting him to agree. But his reaction was less than enthusiastic. Really? Do we need that? He looked pained as he replied. I'm barely keeping us afloat on my income alone. Do we really need to waste money like that? It was true we weren't wealthy. But I didn't see it as a waste if it made his parents even a little bit happier. Then, how about we pay it off little by little using your parents' pensions? Maybe we could borrow a bit from the bank too? At that, my husband seemed somewhat convinced and said, just don't make it my problem. Of course, I couldn't tell my in-laws exactly what he said. Instead, I told them that he'd agreed to let us take out a loan. And my father-in-law was delighted. We went to the bank together, got a loan, and purchased the electric wheelchair. My in-laws were very happy with it. However, not long after, my father-in-law passed away. Both my mother-in-law and I were heartbroken, but my husband muttered, he just left us with debt. I told you we didn't need to buy it. I was sure my mother-in-law heard him. I felt incredibly guilty. It was just the two of us, my mother-in-law and me, living in the house now. Even though she was blind, there were some things she could manage on her own inside the house, which lessened the burden on me quite a bit. Around that time, my husband suggested we start thinking about having children. I had once doubted him, but hearing that, I convinced myself that I must have misunderstood something. We eventually had 2 children together. But unfortunately, my husband didn't change even after they were born. He still didn't care about anything related to the household. I was overwhelmed with housework and raising the children. But at least my mother-in-law seemed happy, which was a small comfort. Though she couldn't see the grandchildren, after my father-in-law passed away. Having the kids around seemed to lift her spirits. She'd been so down, but now she smiled more, listening to the children's lively voices. Despite everything, we managed to live happily enough. Still, just as my colleague once said, my husband continued to come home late from work. I'll never forget what he said at my father-in-law's funeral. He didn't show any love toward his mother or our children. Lately, he would even leave on his days off, saying he was going to work. And I'd stopped feeling any affection for him. I began to think that as long as he brought in money, that was enough. Our broken marriage continued like this. But our children grew up to be kind and thoughtful. The real change in our family came in the spring, when our daughter was 18 and preparing to go to college. I'm heading to work. It was a Saturday, a day he was supposed to be off. I stopped him before he left. You promised to take your mom to the hospital today. It was a promise he'd made just a few days earlier. Today was my mother-in-law's health checkup. And it was also the day we were set to get the keys to our daughter's new apartment, where she'd be living on her own during college. We'd known about these plans in advance, so I had asked him to take his mother to the hospital. What? That's your job as a housewife? He shouted at me. I told you, today's the day Mia gets the keys to her apartment. We need to set everything up for her before she starts college, and I said I'd go with her. When I snapped back at him, my husband got angry too. I had no memory of ever talking back or defying him before. The fact that I was standing up to him for the first time seemed to make him even more agitated. I didn't sign up for this. I married you because I thought I'd be stuck with an old man. And an old hag who no one else wanted. And now you want me to take care of her? If you can't take her, let her go by herself. I was speechless. How could anyone be this cruel? I had sensed for some time that he didn't care about his mother. But to suggest sending a blind woman out alone? And to insult me like that. It was unbearable to find out the real reason he had married me. I was filled with regret. That's enough. That's all I said to him, finally giving up on expecting anything from him. Satisfied that I didn't argue back, he said, "All right then, you take care of the old hag and the kids." And with that, he left the house and never came back. In the end, our daughter had to handle getting the keys to her new apartment on her own and buy everything she needed for her new life. Meanwhile, I took my mother-in-law to her health checkup. Somehow, we made it through the day. Everyone noticed that my husband hadn't returned, but no one said a word about it. A few days later, a letter arrived. It was from my husband. There was no return address, only his name. And inside was a divorce agreement and a brief letter. He wrote that he was living with his mistress now. Didn't want anything to do with the debt left by his parents. And told me to live my life without him. I was exhausted. If this is how things were going to be, cutting ties with him would make me happier. That's what I thought. Before submitting the divorce papers, I told my kids and my mother-in-law. The person who took it the hardest was my mother-in-law. "I'm so sorry." She just kept repeating that, crying as she held my hand. "I've been happy enough with you, Emily, and Mia and John. But once you're divorced, I'll be a stranger. I'll live on my own from now on. It'll take some time, but I'll move out." That's what she whispered. I responded a bit more firmly. "You are like a real mother to me, and to the kids. You're their one and only grandmother. You don't need to worry about anything. Even if I divorce, we're still family. Let's keep living together just as we have been." Hearing that, she sobbed and thanked me. But I couldn't ignore the fear that lingered in the back of my mind. Even if my husband was only an ATM, his presence had provided some financial security. Now, he was gone. I desperately looked for a job, but after years of being a housewife, no one wanted to hire me. Both Mia and John offered to work. When I was beginning to lose hope, my mother-in-law said, "Don't worry about anything. Let the kids go to school as usual. Emily, you don't need to work either. Leave it to me." We were puzzled by her words, but as she promised, nothing in our lives changed. In fact, we were living more comfortably than when my husband was still around. I submitted the divorce papers. And my mother-in-law wanted to file a missing person report for my ex-husband. But I didn't want to see him again. Still, I knew she wanted to see her son, so we filed the report. However, my ex-husband was never found. We continued to live as a family of 4, creating many happy memories. 2 years ago, my mother-in-law passed away and joined my father-in-law. She never got to see her son again. Even though he was her child, there was no way to contact him. When I managed to find his address, no one lived there anymore. We had a small funeral for her with just the 3 of us, and we said our goodbyes. And now, standing in front of me is my ex-husband. I was out shopping when he suddenly appeared in front of me. I thought I must be mistaken and tried to ignore him, but he kept staring at me. He recognized me. He must have thought the same, because he looked over at the much younger woman standing beside him and spoke up, showing her off. "Emily, right? Still looking as miserable as ever. That's a bit rude, huh?" The woman beside him giggled as she said that. It was clear they were mocking me, and I sighed. I was about to walk past them when my ex-husband said, "Has the poor old hag kicked the bucket?" I froze in my tracks and glared at him. "The poor old hag? Who are you talking about?" He snickered and replied, "You know who I mean. That blind old woman you were stuck living with. Heard through the grapevine she passed. Must have been tough for you, huh? Well, now you're free. Though for someone your age, there's only so much freedom you can enjoy, right?" His disgusting laughter echoed in the air. My anger reached its boiling point. But I knew that reacting now would only play into his hands. I forced a smile, hiding my rage. Yeah, I got $3 million from the inheritance. So now I'm living freely without having to work. Thanks for your concern. What? The smile disappeared from my ex-husband's face, though he had just been mocking me moments ago. Well then. As I tried to walk past him, he stood there dumbfounded. Then, in a panic, he called after me. Wait. $3 million in inheritance? What are you talking about? What do you mean, what am I talking about? I mean exactly what I said. Thanks for disappearing, by the way. It made the inheritance process go smoothly without you. My ex-husband's face turned pale. Good, I thought. I hadn't planned on telling him anything. But he deserved to know just how shallow and foolish he really was. You've got to be kidding me. I'm her son. How come I never heard about such a large inheritance? I should have a right to some of that money. I couldn't help but smirk at his words. Oh, but you weren't around. You know, right? If you go missing for 7 years, the law treats it as if you're dead. What? So, in your mother's will, the inheritance came to our son, our daughter, and me. There's no place for you anymore. He stood there, dumbfounded, his expression ridiculous. I nearly laughed out loud. It was only after my mother-in-law passed away that I realized she had planned this all along, asking me to file a missing person report for her son. The substantial inheritance my mother-in-law had left behind. A man who introduced himself as a lawyer came and explained everything to us. It turned out that my mother-in-law's family had been landowners. Like me, she had been estranged from her family, but she still had the right to inherit. When her parents passed away, she quietly took the inheritance without telling anyone. Thanks to her, we were able to live comfortably without worrying about anything. I remember asking her once, "Mother, how do you manage your money? If it's just from your pension, please feel free to spend it however you like." My mother-in-law smiled and said, "I'm spending it exactly how I want, living happily with my family." That's what she told me. From the way she used her money, I knew it wasn't just her pension. But it was her money, and given our situation, we gratefully accepted her generosity. The inheritance she received was far more than she could ever spend in her lifetime. The issue was my husband. If something had happened to her, he would have inherited everything. But she didn't want him to have it. When she discussed this with the lawyer, my husband disappeared. She felt it was a sign that he had severed ties with us. Although she was sad to be separated from us. She had planned to move into a nursing home, thinking she wouldn't burden us. And would spend the inheritance until there was nothing left. But both our son and daughter, as well as myself, insisted that she was family and that she should stay with us. My mother-in-law said there was nothing in the world that made her happier than that. My mother-in-law had wanted to leave the inheritance to us. So she followed the lawyer's advice and filed a missing person report for my husband. By law, after he had been gone for 7 years, he was considered legally dead. A year after that, my mother-in-law passed away, and her inheritance was passed on to her grandchildren, our son and daughter, in place of my husband. Although I wasn't entitled to inherit anything, my mother-in-law left a will that included me as a beneficiary. This way, we were able to receive what she had wanted to give us. You left, and your mother took care of everything. Mia's tuition, John's, and all our living expenses. Thanks to her, we were able to live happily. So, thank you for leaving. My ex-husband stood there, pale, his mouth gaping like a fish. Serves him right, I thought. After that, he started contacting us, ranting about how he was entitled to a portion of the inheritance. This from the man who had been completely silent for years. What a piece of work. People who are legally dead don't get a share of the inheritance. I told him that over and over. Still, he wasn't satisfied and demanded we sit down and talk. I consulted our lawyer. For him to claim any inheritance, he'd need to revoke the missing person declaration and go through a lot of legal procedures. In most cases like this, the grandchildren keep the inheritance. We had no intention of giving him a single penny. I relayed the lawyer's advice to him. If he wanted to inherit, he would also need to pay inheritance tax. When I told him to take care of all that, he fell silent. The kids were present during the conversation as well. I can't take time off work. I don't have time for paperwork. And inheritance tax? I shouldn't have to pay that. You guys should pay my share too. I supported you for years. The least you can do is handle this for me. His audacity left us speechless. Apparently, he was working a day labor job now, and missing even one day was problematic for him. The job he had while we were married? He got fired after repeatedly skipping work without notice. When I asked why he left that job and why he was struggling so much financially, he admitted he had debts, thanks to his former mistress. He'd been moving from place to place, working day-to-day jobs just to pay off what he owed. You understand, right? He said, but I couldn't muster even a drop of sympathy. That woman you were with didn't work out, huh? Then who was that woman I saw you with recently? Puffing out his chest, my ex-husband replied. She's the one I've been searching for all my life. He was clearly lost in his own delusions. Our son, John, was trying hard to hold back his laughter. Are you married to her? I asked. Well, no. We've only been together for 6 months. My ex-husband mumbled in a small voice. That was enough to send our son into fits of laughter. My daughter and I were too stunned to say anything, simply sighing at the absurdity in front of us. And what about the woman you left with when we got divorced? She left. Said she couldn't make me happy. He said it so casually, without even realizing that he had been dumped. He must have gone through woman after woman, never understanding the problem was him. You're not young anymore. Stop pretending you are, old man. I couldn't help but give him that piece of advice, feeling embarrassed for him. But she's the one, my soulmate. Hearing that, I realized that it was pointless to say anything more to him. At least I had found out his address after running into him again. He was living in the next town, in an apartment under a woman's name. My son, John, ended up buying the entire building and becoming the landlord. Grandma gave us that money, and it'd be a waste just to let it sit. I figured investing in real estate would be a smart move. That's what John said. I thought he might have done it to help his father, but that wasn't the case. In fact, if the rent was even a day late, John was quick to go and demand it. The previous landlord had been lenient, but not my son. Mom went through so much because of him. He chose this selfish lifestyle, so he should struggle more than you ever did. It was John's way of punishing his father. My ex-husband had never done anything fatherly for the kids. So it was only natural that they had their own feelings about it. Eventually, unable to endure his new life, my ex-husband came to me, fell to his knees, and begged for forgiveness. "I'm so sorry. I was wrong to leave everything to you, including taking care of my parents and the kids." Seeing him like that made me sigh. He was desperate. "But, I have my own life now. Couldn't you ask John to lower the rent just a little?" he asked with teary eyes. It must have been tough for him. I don't know. If you had at least been a good father to the kids, things wouldn't have turned out like this. You failed as a husband, as a father, and as a person. Now, what do you have left? What was your life even about? You should think long and hard about that. With that, my ex-husband quietly left. His figure looked so small as he walked away. In the end, after repeatedly failing to pay rent, he was forced to leave the apartment. He moved into an old, drafty building that was about 50 years old. I heard he's still working day-to-day jobs, struggling to make ends meet. The soulmate he had been with when I saw him that day? Apparently, she left him when he moved out of the apartment. He had been paying her living expenses, and since he couldn't afford rent anymore, it wasn't surprising she left him. In fact, he should be thankful she stayed with him as long as she did. She was still young, and like me back then, she probably didn't see who he truly was. As for us, we're living happily now, thanks to my mother-in-law. Just like John said, we invested in real estate and stocks. And now we have passive income that allows us to travel and enjoy life. And Mia is getting married. Her fiancé is a kind man, and he treats me well too. Our family is growing, and our happiness will only increase from here. I can appreciate this joy all the more because we overcame such a difficult past.